Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this evening from all over the world. Thank you very much for your time. And I'd just like to share a little bit about why I do this show, because I've met and coached many CXOs across the world. And I've found that they have great insights, which haven't really been available to a lot of people who don't have access to them. So I thought, maybe there's a way to sort of share these views and ideas so that other people could benefit. And my personal view is that whether you're a CXO or an SME owner or a startup CEO, whatever, know that we're all leaders in life, because at home, you lead your families, and at work, you lead your colleagues. And as a leader, you're a role model. So the kind of influence and impact you have with the way you behave, the way you think, has great impact on people around you. So to my mind, leadership begins with the mind, and then it gets translated into different kinds of behavior that you see. And I'm saying all of us have seen leaders, right? All of us have had bosses, some whom we really respect and cherish, and some we don't. But today I have a great leader with me. I have Ranjit Roy with me, who's the head of Middle East at ANZ, and he's also the senior executive officer for ANZ at DIFC. Welcome, Ranjit, to the show.
Thank you, Mudit. Good to be on your show. Happy to be here.
Okay, great. So Ranjit, has very interest and is an extremely interesting individual, and you'll discover that on the show. So the first thing I'll just start off by asking you is, Ranjit, just for the interest of our viewers, would you like to tell them a little bit about your background? Where did you study? What have been your experiences? Where did you work? And, how did you get where you are today?
Sure thing, Mudit. Well, by origin, I'm from India, very much a Calcutta boy, born and brought up in Calcutta. The bulk of my schooling was actually in Calcutta. But then I went on to do my college and my university, both in the US on a scholarship. And thereafter, I fell into the banking trap, as I call it, not by choice. I think it was more by circumstances. And what I thought was going to be just the starting point became a career for life in banking. And today I'm with ANZ, which is one of the 50 largest banks in the world. I look after the Middle East for ANZ Bank, based here in Dubai. I've been here in Dubai for about the last 20 years. And my role covers the Middle East and the operations here. So that's really where I am today with it.
Very good. I mean, that's very interesting. I think at a time when you would have gone, scholarships would have been really scarce, right? So how did you manage to get a scholarship? Just for the interest of viewers.
I was pretty focused because I think I was at a stage in life where I was changing schools. And with that change came some element of instability. But I had already focused my mind on going into getting a program in the US and doing my undergraduate and postgraduate studies there. So at a very early stage, I didn't even finish my class 11, the 11th grade. I had already started doing the American exams early, even though everyone said it's impossible to do it. There was one person in Calcutta who said, no, I've done it, you can do it as well. I took that as an example and said, why not? And I applied to, I think, about 21 universities, and I managed to get a scholarship without having completed my 12th grade. So I got what is called early admission with scholarships, and I did my undergraduate and postgraduate studies in the US. There again, when everyone tells you it's impossible, and even one person said it's possible, I didn't leave any stone unturned. And that's, again, just pure focus and not taking no for an answer.
Absolutely. I think that's an incredible trait there, which you kind of displayed very early in your life, to sort of seek out opportunities, and I'm sure it's held you in good stead. So fantastic story there. And tell us a little bit, after you finished working, where did you work and what did you do?
Well, that's again another story because, I think I was gearing myself towards a career in an international organization, more along the lines of the United Nations. So I did do an internship while I was in the US, in New York, with the UN. But then when it came to actually applying for a job, we used to have quotas those days. The quota for India was pretty full, and I didn't get a job in the UN. So that was my first disappointment because I thought I'd spent a good part of my life gearing myself for an international career with the UN. And I said, I'll take a little break. I'll come back home and probably go on and do a PhD. But That didn't happen either because, my parents were very keen that I should get a stable job and start earning, etc. So I said, okay, let me start try banking. And I did. I started off as a banker, as a management trainee in my first bank in India. And after that, I found that even though one had a mindset about an international career, there was enough international scope and remit within banking, not just in terms of geographical, but in terms of the breadth of products you cover, many of them international in nature, to find that international element that I was always seeking for. So I found that within banking, not by choice, but by having fallen into it, actually.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Very good. Very good. So, there's an interesting piece there where you talked about going to the US and starting an, international career. And thank you for being so honest about saying, you didn't get a job there, which, is a disappointment of sorts at that stage of life. But tell me, I mean, how did you deal with that disappointment and, how have you sort of come back to be where you are today?
It was quite a blow because, you had something in your mind that this is where I'm going to be in so many years. I will be with the United Nations. And that was a large enough organization. But and I had done the internship, so I thought I had the credentials. But again, there's some circumstances outside your control. And when that's outside your control, you seek out the next best opportunity, and you look within those opportunities of what are the attributes that you were actually focusing on. And you can find it. There are other fish to fry. There are other ponds to be in. So in my view, that stood me through good stead, saying that, okay, you go into banking, and then started with consumer banking, did the rounds. And then finally, I found my level in international banking. And I've been doing that now for, oh goodness, it's almost 20 years. So within banking, you have correspondent banking, international banking, and that gave me that international dimension. And that was just by saying, okay, I'm in a space which can be otherwise very, very restrictive, but I still want the international exposure with the product set, with the client set that I would like to have. And I managed to find that and specialize on that. And then that one thing led to the other, and then I finally ended up, getting a broader managerial role in terms of heading the operations here.
Fantastic. I think there's some learning there because the way I see it is, you went in grade 11 when, everybody said it's not possible and you made it happen. And then again, with the so-called, honestly, as you said it, there was disappointment, but you just took the next best alternative, which I think is really such a great trait to have because life doesn't always work out the way you want to, but you've been hungry for those opportunities to look around. And I think that's been, probably one quality that I think a lot of our viewers can take away, that even if things don't go your way, look for the next best opportunity. And I think that's a great trait which you displayed so early in your career. So thanks for that story, Ranjit. Just to take this a little ahead, right? I mean, those were early days. And then, across the last 2-3 decades that you've been almost working, have there been any other times that you might have faced some kind of issue or something that you've had to battle and, get ahead with? Anything there for the viewers?
I think, you get these googlies coming along right through your career, having worked hard to get into a bank. Sometimes, probably a few years into my career, there were dilemmas. There were situations where I said, maybe this is not what I want to do. Maybe it is too restrictive, or maybe I'm not being treated very well or fairly. And then the grass looks greener on the other side. But then I think at such points, you try to take a step back, introspect a bit, and you really weigh the pros and cons and take a slightly more balanced view. And then you have to temper it with a bit of patience and resilience. And I think that really, really stood me through. Otherwise, I would never have imagined a 30-year career in banking. Because at everything, there are restrictions, there are regulations, there are inhibitions. And frankly, when I have a very creative bent of mind, I might have found that impossible to deal with. But then I found that there was scope for creativity, apart from the international dimension that I spoke about earlier. And then I had to balance it out with the personal life. So I said, can we balance out one's professional goals with one's personal goals, or combine them in some way, shape, or form? And I think there was enough scope to do that. So I think that's where the balancing factor came in, tempered with the resilience and the patience factor.
Okay, great. I think there's some great learning there for some of our viewers and our upcoming leaders. And you mentioned that you need to introspect occasionally and see where things are, right? Which really calls for having a good hard look at things the way they are. So I just wanted to check, do you have any sort of reflective practices, anything that makes you assess things, something that you do regularly? How do you do this throughout your life?
There's an innate tendency for us to compare the haves, the have-nots. I'm not keeping pace with my batchmates. I should have been a managing director at this age. I should have been at so-and-so level by so-and-so age. Who's to prescribe those? At the end of the day, if you step back and say, look, if you do a slightly sort of a balanced scorecard, and sometimes I think that's my being in the Middle East, I've learned that there's also a work-life balance. There's also a personal savings element, which balances out just the career progression. So that element of stepping back, introspecting and saying, what is it that makes you tick? Because promotions and progressions in up a corporate or a higher hierarchical ladder will never end. It'll be a never-ending, it's a treadmill that you just be constantly running. I believe at some point you will step back, get off that treadmill, take a balanced view and say, it's fine. Of these 10 elements, I'm not probably going to make it to 5 or 6. The other 4 are strong enough to see me through where I am. And I believe that's what's helped me instead.
Okay, I think there's some great insight there, because you talked about, very often life and a career being like a treadmill and everybody's sort of galloping along. And it's great to be able to step aside and sort of think through. And I think there's some element that you talked about was also that, careers or life is like a marathon and not a sprint, right? So you get time to get off and recalibrate and do that. And I think that's a great learning for a lot of our viewers, because I just like to tell you that if in case things are not going great for you at the moment, I mean, there's some learning from Ranjit here that, even the heads of various banks go through things like that in their personal lives. And there's hope. Just take some, time to introspect and see what works for you. So great learning for our viewers. And you also said, you talked about looking and thinking and I'm one of those firm believers that leadership, firmly begins in the mind, in the sense that you've got to be in a safe or a very reasonable space between your ears, for you to be able to recalibrate, look at these things, and the way you think very often gets reflected in the way you behave at work. So, what are your views on really being able to manage yourself so that you're able to work and put your best foot forward at work?
I think the element of focus. You can't be everything to everyone. You've got to break your tasks down into manageable pieces, focus and prioritize. You've got to have a little bit of patience to see through the results, and you've got to be supportive and empathetic. And I think definitely COVID has made each and every one of us far more empathetic. It has also made us challenge some traditional mindsets about flexibility, flexible working. We're all doing it today. Frankly, I've always done it before, and I've managed to balance that out by sitting maybe on a boat in the Amazon and responding to RFPs, in those days on a BlackBerry, from South America for an RFP in the UK, being coordinated out of the Middle East. So transcending those traditional barriers and geographical limitations that one had, by working flexibly, sensibly, and balancing it out with your personal interests, in my case, travel, for example, I think it's doable. And that brings out the importance of the work-life balance and flexibility within that. Today, it's become a mantra, but about 10, 15 years ago that I'm talking about, it wasn't. It was very much regimented and structured, that these were your working hours, and you work really late, that means you're really working hard. I don't think it's only about working late, it's working hard. I believe that you've got to work smart, you've got to work efficient. I would question people who are burning the midnight oil every day. That means either you're not managing yourself very efficiently, or some people just, spend a lot of idle time in the office. I, for one, have always had a life outside of the office. And I've always believed that the work-life balance is not just lip service, but you enact it, and you live it, and you breathe it. As long as you can manage your priorities and your time schedules sensibly and flexibly.
Okay. So, what I heard, a couple of key terms there was, one was focus, right? To know exactly what you want to achieve, and then prioritize so that you're able to get the most important things done, or at least on track, right? And the third thing I heard a lot about was work-life balance, and something that you've been doing for the last, 10, 15 years. I mean, or more, right from the time you started work. But, I mentioned 10, 15 because you said recently it's become a mantra, right? So maybe I'd like to tell the viewers, what do you do, for the balance? What are your interests in life?
As I said, I was very interested in the international aspect of the world, the people, the cultures, the food, the dress. So at a very young age, I started traveling. Not young, I think when I went to university, I started doing that first with a backpack, and then, of course, going into far more luxurious and more comfortable ways of traveling as well. But each one had its pros and cons. Also, I should travel single a number of times. And then I found that there's a whole world which just opens it makes you far more broad-minded, far more appreciative, far more, you start absorbing and imbibing a lot more by watching other cultures and actually living there, walking the streets, and smelling the air and getting a taste of the place. That became almost like a passion and an ambition. And I met a 95-year-old lady who inspired me and said, there's a whole world out there, and no matter what people tell you, you can go out and travel. And she had done 195 countries, and she's still alive, and she's still a great motivator for me. And she said, son, don't listen to what they say. Just go ahead and see the world. And right now I'm at 122 countries, just by sheer passion of traveling. Yes, sometimes it's a bit of a box ticking exercise, I have been to that country, because you don't have that much time, but you might revisit some of those countries at a later stage in life. So I've joined the Centurion Club, which is people who've crossed 100 countries. So travel, instead of looking at it as a chore or at work or something else, you can actually make it a passion, and it grows on you, and you find like-minded people. And so that is one of the things I did as a hobby. So I would plan my leave around weekends, around long holidays, and I was never in town when those holidays came around. And so travel was one. The other that came with that is cooking, cultures, very much into that. Languages, I've got about 3 or 4 now. With that came the need for mobility. So I've looked at residing in a couple of countries, and I've picked that up. With that comes learning languages. So hand in hand, what was just a passion for travel has become a very international focus, and a pastime and a passion. So that's one of the passions. The other one was, I was never very athletic, but I thought there must be other kinds of sports. And I got into things like motorsports and driving and racing, because it gave me a different sort of rush. And I realized that I do have a bit of a race at work, but I've obviously not made that a be all and end all. But I enjoyed racing, and I started getting on the tracks and racing cars. And that was something I'd never done. I never thought I could do. I never thought I'd have the guts to do it. But again, that's another passion that came in, and Dubai allowed me to do that, and I was fortunate. So once again, balancing out things which were pastimes, making them into passions, and making the time for that on your weekends, etc. A bit of photography, and these sort of interests came into my life, and that helped me balance out and keep my sanity. Otherwise, I'd be completely a workaholic, which is not what I mean. I'm not made out to be a workaholic, and I don't profess to be one.
Fantastic. I think, there's this, I see this theme of focus, where your as focus is work and your as focus about traveling and, some of your hobbies. And I think it's really an inspiration for a lot of us, where you've managed to do 120 countries. Obviously, you planned your vacations, very well, and you've been very focused about that. And so hats off to that. I mean, I think, that's a long way to go. And I think that lady at 95 really seems to have inspired you there. So, great traveling there. And I think one other thing that you mentioned here was this, very honest confession about maybe you weren't very athletic, but you felt the need for speed and you actually got into, racing and tell the audience a little more, what is it that really excites you about racing cars? And, are there any parallels that you find in your work, once you're behind a wheel?
I think at work, there seemed to always be a monetary angle attached to that race. And I found that actually distasteful. So in my case, doing a race just for the fun of doing the race and getting the adrenaline pumped up was far more appealing. And that in a space which was like cars, because I enjoy driving. So started by casual driving, touring, going up, the mountains and doing with the group of like-minded people. And some of them said, "How about racing?" I said, "No, I don't have it in me. I wouldn't have the guts to do it." And then I tried once, twice, three. I've done it a few times. I'm not a professional racer in any way. I'm still an amateur. But it's just getting onto the track, doing those rounds, and then seeing how you control the vehicle and how it responds to you, and building that link with that machine. That became a different high altogether, apart from the thrill of doing the laps. I didn't do it for any sense of victory or just getting ahead of someone, but for the sheer thrill of the speed. And that's a different kind of thrill. So that's something which I really enjoyed. And I felt you might get that in extreme sports, but for me, this was a version of sport actually, which I enjoyed.
Absolutely. I think there's some great learning there. I mean, when you mentioned that at work, people seem to be speeding along just to beat somebody, and there's a monetary angle, and your sport really gives you a chance to be yourself without enjoying it for what it is, giving you that adrenaline rush, and without having to compete as such, right? But so I think there's some great learning there for a lot of our viewers and upcoming leaders, that while you do work hard, make sure you also find those activities that allow you to be in the moment and enjoy what you do, which is very, very critical. I mean, Ranjit is here, he's worked almost 2-3 decades, and, to keep him going, leisure and activities that really interested him help. So there's something for all of us to learn there. And now that he's, come back, now you've, all of us have this, with after 2-3 decades of experience, what is it that you see, in terms of giving advice to a lot of middle managers who want to, become CXOs? What is your advice to them?
I think definitely you need patience, because sometimes you have your own time frame set out, and then the world is not going to go by your time frames always. So you've got to have a little bit of patient capital in you to say, yes, we'll stick it out. With that came in the word that we used before, resilience. Sometimes we are a little too sensitive to situations, but when you start introspecting, when you start stepping back a bit and say, look, it's all right, I'll weather this storm, and that will stay me through my focus. Because otherwise, you can actually dilute or stray away from your focus. Sometimes there's a shorter term or an immediate opportunity which doesn't really exactly tick the boxes for you, and you say, shall I really just wait it out? And sometimes that pays off. And I think in my case, that's happened. I've done 20 years now in the Middle East. It could have been considered stagnation. But in my point of view, it's something I was focused on. And I used that time to really get to know this market, the clients, the ecosystems, the communities I work in. And that became a specialization. And that over time built into a huge wealth of experience, which I think stood me in good stead. So again, a bit of patience and resilience, giving up some short-term benefits or goals being otherwise quite appealing, and just sticking it out for a while. And I think that helped me. That resilience and patience, I think, is an important bit of advice I would share with people. And that's very typical of people here, particularly in the Middle East, because it's a different kind of market, different kind of dynamic. And sometimes you need to be patient for that.
So great. I heard sticking it out, in the long run, right? I mean, sometimes things don't go your way. And that ability to just hang in there and look and learn, I think that's a great trait for, everybody, because careers don't always go the way you plan them. I think there's some great learning there in terms of just one other item. Since you said you worked 20 years in the Middle East and before that you worked in Asia, etc. What is the difference that you found, between these two cultures? What is it that, really helps, or what do you need to do in the Middle East to succeed?
I think in the Middle East, well, it's a bit of a cliche, but definitely there's an element of longevity. There's an element of relationships, which and seeing yourself through various cycles. It is a very high risk environment that we're working in here. And once you know the lay of the land, once you know the geopolitical situations, and once you know where the relative strengths are and what's going to see you through, if you can see yourself through those cycles, you actually come out much stronger. On business, on outcomes of business, and on outcomes of relationships, because that is very important in our line of business, for example, and several others which are in the service sector. So that is very, very important, because having a knee-jerk reaction, for example, is very easy to do in a relatively volatile or high-risk environment, which is what the Middle East is. And within that, I've always said adversity does bring up opportunity. So whenever you've had pockets of adversity, you've just had a little bit of staying power and looking where the opportunities might be within, and lo and behold, something else props up where one didn't expect it. So I believe that that is very critical to this market, as opposed to a very large and mature market like India, which is still, I would say, relatively stable compared to the Middle East, because there's a lot of volatility here. But within volatility, there'll always be pockets which are safe havens, or which one should look at, and I think that's important for this geography.
So great. What I heard was relationship, right, which helps you sometimes navigate things which don't always work out the way they are. And the other thing is just hanging in there, even in times of adversity, to just keep going so that you do find some kind of an opportunity, which will come out. So there's a certain amount of tenacity that I hear from your voice, where you've got to hang in there, and things will turn around, right? Because nothing is permanent. So I think that's some great learning, because a lot of the younger leaders that I have sort of found and I work with, who are on their way to becoming CXO, sometimes, especially in times like today, with a lot of millennials, they don't have that. They want things a bit too quickly. And I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. So, have you had a chance to work with, in this large, diverse organization, right, with a lot of much younger sort of crowd, the millennials? What advice would you tell them? I mean, because they're very hungry.
Well, what I really like is the creativity they bring to the table, because we never had that. So my creativity in my life was not so much my professional life, but more my personal life, whether it's, interiors, collecting antiques, travel, etc. There's a lot of, those were the creative avenues that one had in our times when we started off career. But now it is so pleasingly apparent that the younger generation has different mindsets. They question everything, they challenge everything, they come up with an alternative view, and we're redefining banking, for example. And I think to that extent, we are learning from this generation. And I don't think it's too late for us to learn. We're all adapting very fast to that environment. We're doing away with bricks and mortar, where we've already moved towards e-channels, etc., and various derivatives of that. So I think from that point of view, it's good. But at the same time, what I feel some of the younger generation lack is the patience and the slightly circumspect view that one has to take of saying, we can do this, but these are the pros and the cons. This is the short term, and this is the long term benefit. Particularly when you're investing others' monies, or when you're dealing with the shareholders and stakeholders, you have to keep in mind their interests as well. Nowadays we start looking at ESG. Never thought of that in banking earlier, did we? So it's not just a nice to have now, it's a need to have. So I think, again, we're redefining ourselves in banking, the very way we do financing, etc. So I think we've learned some lessons from them, but at the same time, the importance of the longevity of relationships, not being just deal or transaction oriented, and having learned from past mistakes and saying, this is where we could go wrong, and how to temper your returns with the risks that you have taken, or vice versa. I think that's very, very important.
Okay, that's, I think, a very, very honest and balanced view of the upcoming millennial generation, because you did acknowledge that they have a lot of creativity and they come out with a lot of alternative solutions, which perhaps, we didn't have when we were growing up. And a lot of your creativity came in other areas. But I also heard very clearly that, be patient, don't be impetuous, absolutely just learn to hang in, and there are alternatives and things will. I think there's some great advice there to a lot of millennials who are our viewers, who come onto the show, and I think there's some learning there too, right? Yeah, go on. You wanted to say something?
Also, fear of burnout.
Burnout.
A lot of people just burning out at a very young age because they're so aspirational, and then it's, what do I do next? Because by age 40 or 45, they're way above the peak of their careers, and then they're just burning out and saying, what do we do next? And of course, the money, you can go in with a very large cash-based sort of approach and say, look, I'm going to make so much. But if you're just going to be burning yourself out, when do you get time to enjoy it? Are you going to look back later when you're 60 and say, look, I'm burnt out and I just cannot do anymore because I've been burning the midnight oil, not now, but the last 20 years. So I think, there's a bit of a balance that comes in there. And that's why I talk about work-life balance being very, very important. It keeps your sanity. It also makes you a more balanced person. And also it gives you time to enjoy the things you would like to enjoy, and your family and your friends and whatever else you have.
Yes. So burnout, right? So I think there's some very, very good advice there, because, Ranjit has sort of worked for so long across, various places, but the fear of, when you have too many aspirations and you work too hard consistently, and I think that's very, very relevant advice, because life isn't, I think most people, when they start off, everybody believes it's a sprint, but it's not really a sprint, right? It's a little more than that. And you've got to be able to keep going for the sake of your own good health, as well as your ability to continue to work. So I think some great advice there from Ranjit on that. And coming on to my next question, which is really about executive presence, right? How important do you see is executive presence, and how would you define it? What is sort of appeal to you, and what would you say to young leaders about it?
I think every person is unique. Every leader is unique. You lead by example. You walk the talk. You epitomize what you believe in, right? And so therefore, it's important that your executive presence should carry that with you. Whether it's being a more creative approach, whether it's a more empathetic approach, or a combination thereof, or it's extremely focused, you live those values, and you demonstrate those values in what you do, and then you get people to participate with you if they subscribe to those. And if they don't, you encourage them to come in with divergent views and say, look, this is how we could do it. Maybe you question some of your values as well in the process if you feel it's beneficial. But by and large, I think it's very important that you have to have that executive presence to actually breathe and act the way that you believe you are. And I believe each person is innately and inherently different. And we just don't need to be something that we're not. So I think that genuineness and uniqueness should come through in your executive presence. And that's what I.
Great. So I heard a certain degree of authenticity, a certain genuineness, your ability to walk the talk, right? And actually be some kind of a role model, right? If you're a leader, to be and should come through in your presence, right? And what do you do? Like, say, for example, if you had a choice, right, between two people and and you had to decide, right, who would you promote, right? What are the factors that you think would really differentiate your decision that in terms of actually supporting somebody else, even though both might be doing a great job?
I think I would, it really depends on the scenario, but what I would believe is a person who's got a slightly more open mind, someone who's got a little more, as I said, a little more forward thinking, a bit more vision rather than being very myopic. That's very important. And at the same time, with the open mind comes the flexibility. I think that's extremely important because we're living in an ever-changing world, so dynamic, that you've got to start thinking ahead. It's not just this year's targets, but what's going to be the challenge 3 years, 5 years down the line? And do I need to reshape myself and therefore my organization and the environment that I'm working in? That kind of, it's still difficult because on the one hand, we're seeing focus. And on the other hand, focus seems to always connotate a short term. And I don't believe that's necessary because the focus can extend for a slightly medium term as well, because it might just take time to go up that path. But if that's the consistent focus, then you can follow through with that. So for me, that would be important. The focus combines an element of having an open mind and flexibility, and being able to take the resilience and failures along. Each one, I believe, is a learning experience. So for me, adversity creates opportunity. For me, failure is actually success. Because what is success? I mean, if you haven't failed, you're not a success. That's the way I look.
Okay, great. So, just summarize a few key words for our viewers: focus, openness, the ability to see beyond, the immediate, and a certain amount of flexibility, right? Now, there's obviously this view, and I think it's also got to do a bit with the culture of the organizations. I think there are some organizations that are very quarter-end focused, let's just put it that way, right? So I think typically the American approach is very, very quarter-driven, and if you don't meet some of those quarterly targets, then it doesn't always end up in a very good place. So would you think that the culture of the organization also decides the level of short-term vis-a-vis long-term approach? What has been your experience?
Yeah, I think each organization has a culture, but apart from that, you have the leadership that has a focus, and I think that leadership rubs off on the culture in a way. So you've got your core values of the organization, and I think that's fine, and that those are the values you work within. But then your goals that you set, they're dynamic. I agree, they are dynamic. They probably need tuned to your shareholders, your stakeholders, and various criteria. And even those shareholders and stakeholders are changing what they are looking for, apart from just a sheer return, because now there are things like environmental considerations. Who ever thought that a shareholder would say, look, I'm also worried about which sectors you're in terms of environment or social or gender, things that were not early considerations are. So I think it's a lot more than just numbers and numbers every quarter. And that's very clear in KRAs and KPIs nowadays. Your KPIs are not just revenue or just returns. They're on what would have otherwise been classified other factors like environment, social, and also, of course, the human element. So you have a factor, an empathy factor, which is very much there in our KRAs nowadays. And I think most organizations, international organizations, are doing that. And I'm seeing local organizations here doing that as well. So that has been a game changer in terms of the breadth of KRAs you have, not just numbers, not just this quarter or this month. So I think that's the process. And we don't do reviews nowadays every quarter. We say every day is a review, effectively. Some people are doing away with assessments and reviews the end of a quarter, a year. It's an ongoing process, and we're talking every day.
Okay, I think that's great. So you see a shift from, let's say a couple of years back, where there's a greater consciousness about the environment and, other factors besides just your numbers. But would you see that, primarily in the kind of organization that you work with, or do you actually see it around in the environment too? Because you deal with a lot of big, local banks also, right? So do you see this kind of awareness there?
I won't mention specifically anything pertaining to a particular bank or organization. I think this is a trend that is developing very fast. Earlier, it was a nice to have. Now it's a need to have from stakeholders, shareholders, etc. as well. So it's not just the leadership thing. I need to focus on these. Of course, across the globe, people are at different points of the curve, so to speak, in adapting to these imperatives, as I'd call them. And there might be a lag in some cases, even within the Middle East, for example. Some countries might have already established their 2050 goals in terms of ESG KRAs, for example. Some have not yet. But general direction is moving there, and we're seeing that happening. And these are the key drivers that are happening in a changing world, not necessarily catalyzed by COVID, but in general, we're seeing that. And because of the awareness coming up, the younger generation and the younger investors all having seen that. So to answer your question, that is not specific to a particular organization or a particular region. It's just that the adoption of that or the adaptation to that could be at different levels, and you pitch yourself accordingly. Okay, this organization is at that level, and this one needs little help in coming up with the framework. So again, you have a consultative role there, if not an execution role.
Okay. No, I think that's great to hear, and very heartening to hear that, because it's obviously the need of the hour. And a lot of us, I just hope that we leave, a world which is in a much better place, for the generations to come, because it is a responsibility. So that's great to hear. And, as you've gone on in life, is there something that you thought that, have you discovered in terms of what your purpose could be? What do you really what inspires you, or is there something that you think that you'd really like to contribute to the world? Is there anything that in your mind?
No, I think there's just a lot. Lately I'm doing a lot more things like mentorship, or actually starting to the younger generation, sharing experiences, etc. But I think my purpose in life is really to live life to the fullest and enjoy myself, and make sure I contribute whenever I do. Put your heart and soul into it, and I think I've been doing that quite well. So. The purpose is that because we are educated, we've got to have a career, we've got to earn our salaries and our livelihoods. But within that, there are specific goals that you want to achieve for yourself and the people around you, and contribute to the greater good. That's a rather sweeping motherhood statement, I guess, in a way. But actually, you can translate that into things that you do every day. Bankers don't just make money; they make communities. They live in those communities, and they engender those communities. So I do believe we play a role that you can't just view yourself in isolation. You're not here just to do a deal or a transaction. How do those deals impact the community you work in, or the broader bias where you're working in? I think that has become extremely relevant nowadays, and that's where you actually play a role without really being a non-governmental organization, etc. You're playing a role. If you're doing green finance, you're playing an active role in that. And that's not just lip service, because you're actually going through the deliverables and making sure that happens. And that's a learning curve for us. We're learning about solar energy. We're learning about hydrogen. We're bankers. We never thought we'd be doing this kind of stuff. But that is the world we're living in today. And I'm quite pleased about that, actually.
Oh, that's great. Contribution to society, doing, looking beyond, just the numbers, and actually being part of the ecosystem, right? So I think that seems, what I hear is seems to be quite inspiring. So tell me, if you were to, look back at your life, or even, at the end of your life, and sort of really see, what would you want some people to say about Ranjit? Here was a man who completed.
yeah. I know people like to use the word legacy. I don't want to leave a legacy. I want to live the legacy.
Okay.
And that's my line. My line is, I live the moment, I live the legacy. I'm not here to build and leave a legacy, because that will create itself. But I live the legacy. I live the moment, and I think that's what is for me the most fulfilling part of it. I don't want to be remembered. I don't want to be spoken about. But I live the moment, and as long as I know that whatever I'm doing for myself and the community around me, and the friends around me, and the family around me, and my colleagues, of course, should be in keeping with that. I think living the moment, living it fullest for yourself and the people around you, uh, it's possible for all of us to do it in our own way, which is why I don't leave legacies. I live the legacy.
Okay, great. I think that's a great line, and for a lot of people to really ponder, to so-called live the legacy, right? Live the moment,
Yeah.
create as much joy and to people around you and your friends and families. And I think it's quite evident that you're a living example of that uh, so-called creed and thinking, which is and have you ever wondered, let's say, for example, in another decade, you would let me just try and put it this way, that you're assume that in another decade or whatever time you decide to wind up your so-called corporate career, is there anything else that would interest you to keep going?
Yeah, I've got my creative instincts in me still, and that could be something totally unrelated. It could be F&B, it could be a restaurant, it could be a travel site, it could be photography. Things I've been tinkering around with and quite enjoying. And people tell me, you should do more of that. Um, so far, I've been managing it alongside my day job and my night job and whatever else. But I think that is something maybe I can pursue more fruitfully when I'm done with my banking career. Uh, I've also started doing a bit of mentoring, things that never dreamt I'd be okay at. But it's nice to do that with younger generations who didn't probably know a lot of things that we've been through. So I think from that point of view, sharing that knowledge is important. And the other point of view is really expanding my creative side when I've got more than the time that I have today, which is somewhat limited. I've managed to balance it out so far, but maybe the balance can shift more towards the creative side and doing those pastimes.
Oh, that's great, Ranjit, and it's so nice to hear that you've always talked about the creative side, and from whatever we've seen, whether it's F&B or travel or antiques and everything, and you'd like to spend a lot more. So it's great, and I think there's some learning there for a lot of our viewers too, because over time, right, you've got to have something that is something that interests you besides just work, because I think that's what will get you back to work, or even when work isn't that great, at least you have some interest in life to keep you going, right? So I think that's I think a very interesting learning from Ranjit, and thanks so much, Ranjit. And just as we wind up this interview of sorts, any sort of last thoughts or last sort of words to our viewers who are really leaders and who want to actually come up and aspire to be somebody like you?
No, I would just say to just keep on with the focus. Keep on with the focus. Stay resilient. Cycles will come and cycles will go, and therefore some amount of patience is required. And of course, the balance. For me, the balance is very important, and how you find that balance between work and life and play is up to you. But at the end of the day, you have no one to blame or credit for it apart from yourself. And that's why I think you've got to have immense belief in yourself, in what you do and how you balance your life out. And that's very, very important.
Okay. Those, it's so nice to hear about the so-called balance when a lot of people are sort of really losing their balance, right? Even not just in the last 2 years, but a lot of people don't always balance their lives. And I sort of work with a lot of CXOs across who probably do very well in one area of their life, which is, generating wealth, but they sort of tend to neglect their health, or they tend to neglect relationships. And I think you've been a real role model, for balance. And I hope this inspires a lot of our viewers, that you don't have to sort of, keep going. And interesting, with that balance, he also mentioned focus. So it's, I think, a good mix between focus at work and also focus outside of work. I think when you have focus, in both areas, then you'll get balance, right?
Absolutely.
So thanks so much, Ranjit. It's been a very interesting conversation. And I really hope our viewers have enjoyed this, and there'll be some great takeaways. And thank you very much again.